I never thought a heated garage would turn me into the most hated man in Meadowbrook Springs, Colorado. But here we are, standing in my driveway while Patricia Hammond waves a stack of papers at me like they're on fire. This is a direct violation of Article 7, Section 3, Patricia shrieked, her perfectly highlighted blonde hair not moving an inch despite the November wind whipping through our cul-de-sac. She was the HOA president, a 52-year-old force of nature who treated our suburban neighborhood like her personal kingdom. You cannot, under any circumstances, maintain a heated garage structure without prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. I'm Derek Foster, and I'd been living at 4782 Sagebrush Lane for 6 years without a single issue. I worked as an automotive restoration specialist, which meant I had a genuine need for climate-controlled workspace. My detached 3-car garage wasn't just a luxury, it was essential for my business and my passion. I'd installed the heating system 3 months ago, running everything through proper permits with the city of Aurora, following every building code to the letter. Patricia, I have all the city permits right here, I said, pulling out my phone to show her the digital copies. Everything is completely legal and up to code. The heating system doesn't change the external appearance of the garage at all. Her face turned an impressive shade of crimson. I don't care about city permits. The HOA has its own rules, and you violated them. You should have submitted Form ARC 2401 for any major modifications to existing structures. It's not a modification to the structure, I explained, trying to keep my voice level. It's an internal upgrade, like adding insulation or replacing a water heater. The HOA guidelines specifically state that internal improvements that don't alter the external aesthetic don't require pre-approval. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. We'll see what the board has to say about that. You'll be receiving a formal notice within 48 hours. And Derek, I'd strongly suggest you stop using that heated garage immediately. She spun on her expensive heels and marched back to her own house 3 doors down, leaving me standing there with my neighbor, George Martinez, who'd been watching the whole exchange from his lawn. Man, she's got it out for you, George said, shaking his head. Good luck with that battle. I didn't think much of it initially. Patricia had a reputation for being overzealous, but I'd done everything by the book. My garage was immaculate, the heating system was energy efficient and silent, and from the outside, nobody could even tell it was there. I restored classic cars as a side business, and during Colorado winters, having a heated workspace was non-negotiable. I'd recently finished a 1967 Mustang that sold for $43,000, and I had a 1972 Chevelle waiting in the garage that would likely bring in even more. But Patricia wasn't bluffing. 2 days later, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. The HOA was fining me $500 for unauthorized structural modifications and demanding I cease all heating operations immediately. If I didn't comply within 10 days, the fines would increase to $100 per day. I called an emergency meeting with my lawyer, Thomas Bridges, who'd helped me with my business contracts before. He read through the HOA documents with a frown that deepened with every page. This is aggressive, even for an HOA, Thomas said, adjusting his glasses. They're interpreting the rules in the broadest possible way. Technically, they might have a case if they argue that installing heating equipment constitutes a modification, but it's a stretch. The problem is fighting this will cost you time and money. What are my options? I asked. You can appeal to the board, but Patricia runs that board with an iron fist. You could take it to mediation, or if it comes to it, sue the HOA. But Derek, litigation against an HOA is expensive and time-consuming. They have deep pockets from everyone's dues, and they can afford to drag this out. I left his office feeling frustrated. This wasn't about rules or regulations. This was personal. Patricia had never liked me, mainly because I'd voted against her in the last HOA election. She'd won anyway, but she had a long memory for anyone who opposed her. The following week, I attended the HOA board meeting held in the community center. About 30 homeowners showed up, most of them there for other issues. When my turn came, I presented my case clearly and calmly. I showed the city permits, explained the heating system's installation, and pointed out that nothing about my garage exterior had changed. Patricia sat at the center of the board table, flanked by her two loyal supporters, Margaret Chen and Robert Whitmore. Margaret was a retired accountant who nodded at everything Patricia said, while Robert was a real estate agent who'd made it clear he wanted Patricia's endorsement for his business. "The rules are clear," Patricia said before I'd even finished. "Any modification requires pre-approval. You didn't get pre-approval. Therefore, you're in violation. The fines stand and the heating system must be removed or disabled. Can I at least get a variance or submit a retroactive approval?" I asked. "Denied," Patricia said immediately. "Next item on the agenda." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're not even going to discuss it with the board. We discussed it before the meeting," Margaret chimed in. "The decision is unanimous." That was a lie. I could see it in Robert's face. He looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. But he wasn't going to stand up to Patricia. I walked out of that meeting knowing I had a serious problem. The fines would start accumulating, and eventually, the HOA could put a lien on my property. I needed a different approach. That's when I remembered the vehicles. Every summer, 3 of my neighbors paid me to store their recreational vehicles and classic cars in my garage. George had a vintage Harley-Davidson. Another neighbor named Stephen Phillips kept his 1985 Corvette with me, and Todd Armstrong stored his wife's convertible BMW. They each paid me $200 a month during the off-season, which added up to decent supplemental income. My heated garage was perfect for their needs because it kept their vehicles in pristine condition, protecting them from moisture, temperature fluctuations, and pests. But here's what made this interesting. Those 3 neighbors were all friends with Patricia. George played golf with her husband, Stephen's wife was in Patricia's book club, and Todd served on the HOA landscaping committee with her. If I couldn't use my heated garage anyway, why should I continue providing this service? I called each of them that evening. George answered first. "Hey Derek, what's up?" he asked cheerfully. "George, I've got bad news. The HOA is forcing me to shut down my heated garage. Patricia's implementing daily fines if I keep running it. I'm going to have to return everyone's vehicles by the end of the month." There was a long pause. "Wait, what?" "You're serious?" "Completely serious." "I'm sorry, man. I know you've been keeping the Harley here for 3 years, but I can't afford $100 daily fines." "That's insane," George said. "Where am I supposed to store it?" "Everything else around here is unheated storage, and you know what Colorado winters do to vintage bikes." "I don't know what to tell you," I said honestly. "This is Patricia's doing. Maybe talk to her about it." The conversations with Stephen and Todd went similarly. Both were upset. Both immediately blamed Patricia, and both promised they'd have words with her. I gave them until November 30th to retrieve their vehicles. That gave them 3 weeks to find alternative storage, which seemed fair even though I was angry at the situation. The first domino fell 4 days later. George showed up at my door looking frustrated. "I talked to Patricia," he said. "She won't budge. She says rules are rules. But Derek, I looked into storage facilities." The closest climate-controlled unit big enough for the Harley is in Denver, 40 minutes away, and it costs $350 a month. Plus, they have a 6-month minimum commitment. That's rough, I said, and I meant it. I wish I could help, but my hands are tied. I know. It's not your fault. He paused. Listen, is there any way you could maybe run the heating system just a little bit? Keep it at like 50 degrees instead of 70. Would the HOA even know? George, they're watching me like hawks now. Patricia drove by twice yesterday, and I saw Margaret taking pictures of my garage from the street. If they catch me running it at all, those fines will bury me. He left dejected, and I actually felt bad. George was a good guy caught in the middle of Patricia's vendetta. Stephen came by the next day with a different approach. Derek, what if I talked to the board? I could vouch for you, explain that the heated garage doesn't hurt anyone. You could try, I said, though I doubted it would help. But Patricia's made up her mind. This isn't about logic or fairness. Todd was the most upset. His wife's BMW was a 40th birthday present, and she was apparently livid that it would have to sit in their driveway all winter or go into unheated storage. Amanda is ready to go to war over this, Todd told me. She's talking about running against Patricia in the next election. The next election isn't until spring, I pointed out. That doesn't help us now. As November progressed, the pressure on Patricia increased from unexpected directions. It turned out that my 3 storage customers weren't quiet about their displeasure. They talked to other neighbors, explained the situation, and suddenly, the HOA's aggressive stance didn't look quite so righteous. People started asking questions at the community Facebook page about why the HOA was targeting someone who'd been providing a valuable service to neighbors. Patricia's response was to double down. She posted a long message about maintaining standards and following proper procedures, and not allowing personal convenience to override community rules. It was a masterclass in missing the point, and the comments section turned against her quickly. Then the fine started. December 1st arrived, and I received a notice that I now owed the initial $500 plus 10 days of $100 daily fines, totaling $1,500. The notice stated that if I didn't pay within 30 days and disable the heating system, they'd begin legal proceedings to place a lien on my property. I wasn't running the heating system. I'd shut it down on November 15th, the same day I'd called my storage customers. But I hadn't bothered to tell Patricia that, and apparently she hadn't verified it. She was just assuming I was still using it. I called Thomas Bridges again. They're fining me for something I'm not even doing. Can they do that? Thomas laughed, which wasn't the response I expected. This is actually good for you. If they're claiming you're violating their order but you have proof you've complied, that significantly weakens their position. Do you have evidence you shut down the system? I can get it, I said. I contacted my utility company and requested detailed energy usage reports for my property. The data would show a dramatic drop in electricity consumption starting in mid-November, proving the heating system wasn't running. While I waited for those documents, the neighborhood drama escalated. George found out that the only affordable storage option for his Harley was an unheated unit in Commerce City, a sketchy area north of Denver. He moved the bike there in early December, complaining bitterly to anyone who'd listen. Stephen discovered that climate-controlled storage for his Corvette would cost him almost $500 a month in Aurora. He ended up renting space from a friend of a friend in Littleton, but it added 20 minutes to his commute whenever he wanted to check on the car. Todd's situation was the worst. His wife Amanda refused to put her BMW in unheated storage, insisting it would damage the paint and interior. They ended up parking it in their own garage, which meant Todd's daily driver had to sit outside all winter. In Colorado. This did not make Amanda happy, which did not make Todd happy, which made Patricia's life more difficult because Todd started vocally opposing her at every HOA meeting. The December board meeting was tense. I attended with my utility records in hand, printed and highlighted. When the agenda reached enforcement actions, Patricia smugly announced that I was now in violation of the cease and desist order and owed $2,500 in accumulated fines. I stood up. Patricia, I've complied with your order since November 15th. The heating system has been completely shut down. Here's documentation from the utility company showing my electricity usage dropped by 62% starting that date. I distributed copies to the board members. Patricia's face went through several interesting color changes as she scanned the document. "This doesn't prove anything," she stammered. "You could be using space heaters or other equipment." "The whole point of my system was even heating throughout a large space," I said calmly. Space heaters would show up in the electricity usage. They're incredibly inefficient. The data clearly shows I shut down a major electrical system exactly when I said I did. Robert Whitmore, the real estate agent, finally found his spine. "Patricia, this looks pretty conclusive to me. If he's not running the system, we can't fine him for running the system. We can fine him for installing it without permission," Patricia snapped. "That's the initial $500 fine, which is already questionable," another board member, Lisa Yamamoto, pointed out. Lisa was newer to the board and hadn't been completely assimilated into Patricia's orbit yet. "But we can't keep adding daily fines if he's not actively violating the cease and desist." The board ended up voting to halt the daily fines but upheld the initial $500 penalty. Patricia looked ready to explode, but she was outvoted 4-2. It was the first time I'd seen her lose a board vote since she'd become president. I paid the $500 under protest and filed a formal appeal. Thomas advised me that paying it didn't mean I was admitting guilt. It just stopped the HOA from taking more aggressive action while we fought the underlying issue. January brought a cold snap that lasted 3 weeks. Temperatures dropped below zero multiple times, and snow piled up in heavy, wet layers. This was exactly the weather that made heated storage valuable. George's Harley, sitting in its unheated unit in Commerce City, developed moisture problems. The temperature swings caused condensation to form inside the engine, and despite his best efforts to prevent it, rust started forming. He'd have to do a complete engine rebuild before he could safely ride it in the spring. The repair cost estimate was $3,200. Stephen's Corvette fared better, but the space he was renting turned out to have a leaky roof. Water damage affected the interior carpeting, requiring professional restoration that cost $1,900. Todd's wife's BMW, sitting in their garage, stayed in decent shape, but the forced reshuffling meant Todd's truck accumulated damage from being parked outside. Ice caused a window seal to fail, and road salt corroded part of his undercarriage. His repair bills totaled around $800. All three of them were furious, and all three blamed Patricia directly. The neighborhood sentiment turned decisively against her. People started digging into other HOA decisions she'd made, questioning whether her enforcement of rules was selective and personal. That's when someone discovered the interesting fact about Patricia's own property. A neighbor named Diana Kozlowski posted on the community Facebook page with pictures showing that Patricia had installed a decorative fountain in her backyard, without submitting it for architectural review. The fountain was clearly visible from the street due to the corner lot position of her house. The Facebook post went viral within our community. Diana had done her homework, pulling up the HOA guidelines that specifically required approval for decorative water features visible from public areas. Patricia had installed her fountain in April, 8 months ago, without filing any paperwork. The comments section exploded. People pointed out the blatant hypocrisy. Patricia was fining me $500 for an internal heating system that didn't change my property's appearance, while she'd installed a decorative fountain without following the same process she demanded from everyone else. Patricia tried to defend herself, claiming the fountain was temporary and decorative, not structural. Nobody was buying it. The fountain had a permanent concrete base, electrical wiring for the pump, and landscaping around it. It was as permanent as any installation could be. Lisa Yamamoto called an emergency board meeting. The agenda had only one item: discussion of equitable enforcement of HOA regulations. The community center was packed. I'd never seen so many neighbors at an HOA meeting. People were standing along the walls, and several had brought popcorn, literally treating it like entertainment. Lisa opened the meeting with a diplomatic but firm statement. It has come to the board's attention that there may be inconsistencies in how we've been enforcing our architectural review requirements. We need to address this to maintain trust in the HOA's governance. Deanna presented her evidence about Patricia's fountain, including the dates of installation, photos, and the specific HOA rules it violated. She'd prepared a whole presentation, complete with highlighted documents and a timeline. Patricia tried to argue that decorative fountains were different from structural modifications, but her argument fell apart quickly. Robert pointed out that the HOA guidelines made no such distinction, and several other homeowners chimed in with questions about why Patricia's fountain didn't require approval but my internal heating system did. Then George stood up. I want everyone to know the real-world consequences of this selective enforcement. My vintage Harley, which was in perfect condition in Derek's heated garage, now needs a $3,200 engine rebuild because Patricia forced him to shut down a system that wasn't hurting anyone. That's money out of my pocket because of personal vendetta. Stephen spoke next, describing his water damage and restoration costs. Todd followed, talking about his truck's damage and his wife's fury at the situation. The mood in the room shifted from curiosity to anger. These weren't abstract rule violations anymore. People were seeing concrete harm caused by Patricia's decisions. Margaret Chen, Patricia's loyal supporter, tried to defend her. The rules exist for a reason. We can't just let people do whatever they want. Then Patricia should follow the same rules, someone shouted from the back. The meeting devolved into arguments and cross-talk. Lisa eventually called for order and proposed that the board conduct a comprehensive review of all recent enforcement actions to ensure consistency. The motion passed with Patricia abstaining and Margaret voting no. I thought that might be the end of it, but Patricia wasn't done. She was cornered and angry, which made her dangerous. 2 weeks later, I received another letter from the HOA. This one claimed that my garage itself was in violation of setback requirements, and that I'd never received proper approval for its construction in the first place. They were demanding documentation, proving the garage was legally built, or I'd face fines and potential orders to demolish it. This was absurd. The garage had been there when I bought the house 6 years ago. It had been built in 1998 by the original homeowners, long before Patricia lived in the neighborhood. I pulled out my property records and found the original building permits from 1998. Everything had been properly approved and inspected. The garage met all setback requirements with room to spare. But when I looked closer at the HOA's letter, I realized what Patricia was doing. She was claiming that the HOA's architectural guidelines had changed in 2003, implementing stricter setback requirements, and that existing structures should have been brought into compliance within a reasonable time frame. She was trying to apply retroactive rules to force expensive modifications or demolition. Thomas Bridges read the letter and immediately recognized it as legally problematic. "This is overreach," he said. "Grandfathering existing structures is standard practice. They can't arbitrarily decide that buildings constructed before rule changes are suddenly in violation. That's not how property law works." "So what do?" I asked. "We fight back hard. This is harassment at this point, and we can make a case for that." "But Derek, I think it's time to consider going on offense instead of just defending." "What do you mean?" Thomas leaned back in his chair. "Patricia violated the same rules she's been using to attack you. File a formal complaint against her with the HOA board. Demand the same $500 fine and cessation order for her fountain. Make her follow the process she forced on you." I liked this idea. It felt like justice. I filed the complaint the next day, complete with Diana's photos, documentation of the HOA rules, and a timeline showing Patricia had now had 9 months to submit retroactive approval, but hadn't done so. I requested the same $500 fine I'd been forced to pay, plus daily fines of $100 for every day she continued operating the fountain without approval. The complaint had to be reviewed by the board, which meant Patricia would be sitting in judgment of herself. But with Lisa Yamamoto pushing for consistent enforcement and Robert starting to break ranks, I thought I had a chance. The February board meeting was standing room only again. News of my complaint had spread, and people were invested in seeing how it played out. Patricia tried to keep my complaint off the agenda, but Lisa insisted it be heard. When the time came, Patricia attempted to recuse herself from the vote, but Margaret pointed out that would leave only 4 board members, and they needed a majority decision. "Then we need a special meeting with an independent arbitrator," Lisa suggested. This went back and forth for 20 minutes until finally Robert made a motion. "I move that we apply the exact same standard to Patricia's fountain that we applied to Derek's heating system. $500 fine, requirement to submit retroactive approval or remove the feature." The motion needed a second. The room held its breath. Margaret wouldn't second it. Patricia obviously wouldn't. Lisa raised her hand. "I second the motion." The vote was 3 in favor: Robert, Lisa, and another board member named Kenneth Drake who'd been quiet until now. 2 opposed: Patricia and Margaret. Patricia's fountain was officially in violation. Patricia's face went white, then red, then purple. She stood up so fast her chair tipped backward. "This is a witch hunt. I've dedicated 3 years to this board, and this is how you repay me. By siding with someone who flagrantly violated our rules. You violated the same rules," Lisa said quietly. "That's the whole point." Patricia gathered her papers, or rather, she swept them into a messy pile while glaring at everyone. "I resign from this board effective immediately. You can all deal with the consequences of letting chaos take over." She stormed out, Margaret hurrying after her. The room erupted in conversations, some shocked, some celebratory. Kenneth Drake, who'd been vice president, automatically became acting president until a special election could be held. He adjourned the meeting, looking overwhelmed by what had just happened. I sat there processing it all. Patricia had finally pushed too far, and her own absolute adherence to rules had become the weapon that defeated her. But I should have known it wasn't over. People like Patricia don't just walk away quietly. The next morning, I found my garage had been vandalized. Someone had spray-painted "Rule Breaker" across the door in bright red paint. My security cameras caught footage of two figures in hoodies doing it around 3 in the morning, but the video quality wasn't good enough to identify them. I filed a police report with the Aurora Police Department. Officer Martinez came out to document the damage and collect the video footage. HOA dispute, he asked, sounding unsurprised. How'd you guess? We get these calls more often than you'd think. Neighborhood politics bring out the worst in people. He handed me a card. If anything else happens, call immediately. Vandalism can escalate. I spent $200 having the garage door professionally cleaned and repainted. The paint had been cheap spray paint, which made removal easier, but it still took a full day of work. George helped me review my security footage, and we both agreed one of the figures looked like it might be Margaret Chen based on height and build, but we couldn't be certain. The police said they'd investigate, but warned me that without clear identification, it would be hard to press charges. 3 days later, someone slashed 2 of my truck tires while it was parked in my driveway. Again, the security footage showed hooded figures but no clear identification. Another police report, another $300 in tire replacement costs. Officer Martinez came back out. Mr. Foster, this is clearly targeted harassment. I'm going to increase patrols in your area, but you might want to consider additional security measures. Better cameras, motion-activated lights, maybe a doorbell camera for a different angle. I upgraded my security system, spending almost $1,000 on high-definition cameras with night vision and better coverage angles. I also installed motion-activated floodlights around my entire property. The harassment stopped after that, probably because the improved security made the risk too high. But the damage was done. I was out about $1,500 in repairs and upgrades, all because Patricia couldn't handle being held to her own standards. The HOA scheduled a special election for March to fill Patricia's vacant seat and hold the annual board elections. Todd's wife Amanda threw her hat in the ring for president, running on a platform of common sense enforcement and treating homeowners like adults. Lisa Yamamoto ran for vice president. Several other neighbors filed for the remaining positions. I didn't run for anything. I'd had enough of HOA politics. I just wanted to use my heated garage and live my life. But I did campaign for Amanda and Lisa, and so did George, Stephen, and Todd. We talked to neighbors, shared our stories, and made sure people understood what had happened. The election in late March was decisive. Amanda won the presidency with 68% of the vote. Lisa kept her seat. Kenneth Drake stayed on as treasurer. 2 new members joined who'd been critical of Patricia's leadership style. Margaret Chen lost her seat entirely. The new board's first meeting in April addressed my situation directly. Amanda proposed rescinding the $500 fine I'd paid, issuing me a full refund, and formally approving my heating system as an internal improvement that didn't require architectural review. The motion passed unanimously. I got my $500 back, plus a written apology from the board acknowledging that the previous enforcement action had been inconsistent with established HOA practices and standards. Amanda also pushed through new guidelines clarifying what required architectural review and what didn't. Internal improvements that didn't alter exterior appearance were explicitly exempted from pre-approval. The rules around retroactive enforcement were tightened to prevent future abuse. And most importantly, board members were now required to disclose their own compliance with any rule they were voting to enforce against someone else. These were good changes that should have existed all along. It took Patricia's vindictive overreach to make them happen. With my garage officially approved and the heating system legal under HOA rules, I could resume normal operations. George, Stephen, and Todd all asked if they could store their vehicles with me again for the next winter season. Absolutely, I told them. Same rates as before. George's Harley had been repaired by then, though he'd had to pay for the full engine rebuild. Stephen's Corvette looked good after the interior restoration. Todd's wife's BMW had survived its winter in their garage, though Todd's truck still bore some scars from its outdoor exposure. But here's where things took an unexpected turn. In May, I got a call from Officer Martinez. "Mr. Foster, I wanted to update you on your vandalism case. We've made arrests." "Really?" I was genuinely surprised. I'd assumed the case would go nowhere. "Yes, sir. We caught someone on camera vandalizing another property in your neighborhood with the same red spray paint. When we brought her in for questioning, she admitted to your garage and several other incidents. She also implicated an accomplice." "Who was it?" "Margaret Chen and her adult son, David. They've been charged with criminal mischief and property damage. It's a Class 2 misdemeanor in Colorado, which could mean up to a year in jail and fines up to $1,000. The DA might offer a plea deal, but they're taking it seriously because there were multiple incidents showing a pattern of behavior." I sat down heavily. I'd suspected Margaret might be involved, but having it confirmed was something else entirely. "What happens now?" "They'll go through the court system. You'll probably be contacted about restitution for your damages, and you might be called as a witness if it goes to trial." Margaret and David Chen were arraigned in June. I attended the hearing, sitting in the back of the Jefferson County courtroom in Golden. Margaret looked diminished somehow, smaller and older than she'd seemed during the HOA battles. David was in his late 20s, looking uncomfortable in an ill-fitting suit. Their attorney negotiated a plea deal. Both pled guilty to criminal mischief charges. Margaret was sentenced to 6 months probation, 120 hours of community service, and ordered to pay $1,500 in restitution to me for the damage and security upgrades. David got similar terms but with 80 hours of community service. The judge was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who clearly had no patience for neighborhood feuds escalating to vandalism. "Miss Chen, you're 58 years old," she said sternly. "You should know better than to engage in this kind of petty, destructive behavior. Whatever your grievances with your neighbor, there are legal and civil ways to address them. Spray painting someone's property in the middle of the night is not one of them. You're lucky the prosecution agreed to the misdemeanor charge. If this had escalated further, you'd be facing felony charges." Margaret nodded, looking at the floor. When the hearing ended, she left quickly without making eye contact with anyone. I never found out exactly what Patricia's role was in the vandalism, if any. Margaret and David never mentioned her in their statements, and there was no evidence connecting her. But I had my suspicions. The timing was too convenient, happening right after Patricia's resignation and the board vote against her fountain. Patricia herself moved out of Meadowbrook Springs in July. A "for sale" sign appeared in her yard, and within 6 weeks, the house sold. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd moved to a townhouse in Denver proper, somewhere without an HOA. The irony was not lost on anyone. Her fountain, incidentally, had been removed in April. The new owners of her house had it taken out before they even moved in, installing a simple flower bed instead. As summer progressed into fall, life in Meadowbrook Springs returned to normal. The new HOA board operated efficiently and fairly, addressing legitimate concerns without the personal vendettas that had characterized Patricia's tenure. Amanda proved to be an excellent president, organized and diplomatic, but willing to make tough calls when needed. My business thrived. Word had spread about my heated garage, and the quality of my restoration work, and I had more clients than I could handle. I'd finished the 1972 Chevelle in June, selling it for $51,000 to a collector in Wyoming. I was currently working on a 1969 Camaro that was going to be spectacular when completed. In October, as the weather started cooling and we approached another winter, George, Stephen, and Todd brought their vehicles back for storage. George had decided the risk of keeping his Harley in unheated storage was too high after his expensive lesson from the previous winter. Stephen wasn't taking any chances with his Corvette, and Todd's wife had made it clear that her BMW was not spending another winter in their garage, period. But something interesting had happened over the summer. Other neighbors had heard about my storage services. I got inquiries from 4 additional homeowners wanting to store vehicles over the winter. My 3-car garage could comfortably hold 6 vehicles if I arranged them efficiently, which I could. I raised my rates slightly to $300 per month, reflecting the increased demand and the value of climate-controlled storage. Even at that price, it was cheaper than commercial facilities and more convenient. All 6 spots filled immediately. That meant I was bringing in $1,800 per month during the winter storage season, October through April. 7 months of storage income totaled $12,600. Not bad for space I would have had anyway. The heated garage that Patricia had tried so hard to shut down was now generating more income than ever before. The attempt to punish me had backfired spectacularly, leading to her resignation, criminal charges against her closest ally, and my business expansion. There was a lesson in there somewhere about karma and proportional responses, but I was too busy enjoying the outcome to dwell on philosophy. In November, I ran into Todd at the grocery store. We chatted about the upcoming winter and how much better the HOA was functioning under Amanda's leadership. "You know what the funny thing is?" Todd said as we stood in the produce section. Patricia thought she was protecting the neighborhood standards and property values, but all she did was create chaos and drive herself out. Meanwhile, you're still here, your garage is legal, and everyone's happier. Sometimes the harder you squeeze, the more things slip through your fingers. He was right. Patricia's rigid, punitive approach had destroyed her own position while strengthening mine. If she just left my heating system alone from the beginning, none of this would have happened. I'd have quietly continued storing a few vehicles. She'd still be HOA president, and Margaret Chen wouldn't have a criminal record. But instead, Patricia had to make it personal. She had to turn a non-issue into a crusade, and when that crusade failed, it took her down with it. December brought the first serious snowstorm, 8 inches falling overnight. I walked out to my garage that morning, unlocked the door, and stepped into the comfortable 65-degree warmth. 6 beautiful vehicles sat in 2 neat rows. George's Harley, Stephen's Corvette, Todd's wife's BMW, and 3 others belonging to neighbors I'd gotten to know better over the past months. Everything was exactly as it should be. Climate-controlled, properly maintained, legally approved, and generating good income. The heated garage had survived Patricia's assault and emerged stronger. I started my workday on the Camaro, losing myself in the detailed restoration work I loved. Outside, snow continued to fall, but inside my heated garage it might as well have been spring. Around noon, Amanda stopped by. She'd taken to doing informal check-ins with homeowners, part of her more accessible leadership style. "Just wanted to see how everything's going," she said, looking around the garage appreciatively. "This is a nice setup you have here." "Thanks, it works well. You know, I've been thinking about what happened with Patricia," Amanda said. The whole situation was a good reminder that HOA rules are supposed to serve the community, not the other way around. Rules without common sense and fairness just breed resentment. That's a good way to put it, I agreed. Anyway, I won't keep you. Just wanted you to know the board is here if you need anything. And Derek, thanks for not giving up when Patricia came after you. You fighting back showed a lot of other people that the HOA isn't untouchable. After she left, I thought about her words. I hadn't set out to be some kind of HOA rebel. I just wanted to heat my garage and do my work. But sometimes standing up for yourself has consequences beyond the immediate situation. Other homeowners had seen that you could push back against unreasonable enforcement, that you could demand consistency and fairness. The neighborhood was better for it. The HOA was better for it. Even I was better for it, with my expanded storage business and my officially approved heating system. January brought more cold weather and more vindication. The Denver Post ran a feature story about HOA conflicts, and someone from Meadowbrook Springs had submitted our story as an example. The reporter, a woman named Jennifer Blackstone, called me for an interview. I was hesitant at first, not wanting to rehash the drama. But Jennifer was professional and genuinely interested in the broader issues of HOA governance and homeowner rights. The article ran in early February, titled, "When HOA Rules Become Weapons: A Colorado Neighborhood's Fight for Fairness." It covered Patricia's vandalism attacks, Margaret's criminal charges, the board election, and the reforms Amanda had implemented. I was quoted discussing the importance of consistent rule enforcement and the dangers of allowing personal conflicts to drive HOA decisions. The story got picked up by a few other publications and shared widely on social media. I got emails from homeowners in other HOA communities who'd faced similar situations, thanking me for speaking up. It was more attention than I'd wanted, but it served a purpose. HOA abuses thrive in darkness, when homeowners feel isolated and powerless. Shining a light on what happened in Meadowbrook Springs helped others understand they weren't alone. Spring came early that year. By late March, temperatures were consistently above 50 degrees, and the stored vehicles started going back to their owners. George picked up his Harley on a sunny Saturday, running his hands over the pristine engine. "No rust, no moisture damage, perfect condition," he said happily. "This is what climate-controlled storage should be." "Thanks, Derek." One by one, the other vehicles departed. By mid-April, my garage was back to just my own cars and current restoration projects. But I already had commitments for next winter from all 6 previous customers plus 3 new ones. I'd have to get creative with spacing to fit 9 vehicles, but it was a good problem to have. The HOA held its annual meeting in May, a routine affair that was remarkably drama-free compared to the previous year. Amanda presented the board's accomplishments. Lisa gave a financial report showing the HOA was operating efficiently under budget, and various committee updates were shared. When the meeting opened for questions, someone asked about Patricia and whether there were any remaining issues from her tenure. Amanda handled it diplomatically. "The previous board's decisions have been reviewed and addressed where necessary. We've implemented new policies to ensure fair and consistent enforcement going forward. I think it's time we move forward as a community rather than dwelling on past conflicts." There was general agreement with that sentiment. People were ready to be done with the drama. As I left the meeting that evening, walking back to my house under a clear Colorado sky, I reflected on how much had changed in 18 months. It had started with a simple desire to heat my garage for my work. It had spiraled into fines, board battles, vandalism, criminal charges, and a complete change in HOA leadership. But in the end, justice had prevailed. Not perfect justice, maybe, but close enough. Patricia was gone, living elsewhere and no longer able to torment homeowners with selective enforcement. Margaret had a criminal record and probation, a consequence of letting her anger override her judgment. The HOA had new leadership that actually cared about being fair. And I had my heated garage, legally approved and more successful than ever. Sometimes the universe has a sense of balance. Patricia had tried to punish me for a non-violation, and in doing so, she'd created the circumstances for her own downfall. She'd banned my heated garage, thinking she could control me through fines and threats. Instead, I'd stopped storing summer vehicles for free, which had angered her allies, which had led to her being held to her own standards, which had triggered her resignation and everything that followed. Cause and effect, action and reaction, karma and consequence. Whatever you wanted to call it, the result was the same. The person who tried to weaponize HOA rules for personal vendettas ended up destroyed by those same rules. I'd learned some valuable lessons through all this. I learned that communities need governance, but that governance without accountability becomes tyranny. I learned that standing up to unreasonable authority matters, even when it's difficult and expensive. I learned that most people are fundamentally fair-minded and will support justice when they see clear injustice. And I learned that a heated garage in Colorado is not just a luxury. It's a valuable asset that people will pay good money to access. Business insight from HOA drama. Who would have thought? The summer passed peacefully. I completed the Camaro restoration in July, and it sold for $62,000, my highest sale yet. I started work on a 1970 Dodge Challenger that had been sitting in a barn in rural Kansas for 20 years. It was going to be a challenging project, but the kind I loved. George occasionally stopped by to chat while I worked. We'd become genuine friends through the whole ordeal, bonded by shared experience. You ever think about what would have happened if you'd just given in? He asked one evening, sitting on a stool in my garage while I worked on the Challenger's suspension. If you just paid the fine, shut down the heating and not fought back. Yeah, I've thought about it, I admitted. I'd have lost money. You and Stephen and Todd would have lost money and had damaged vehicles. And Patricia would still be HOA president, making everyone's lives harder with her petty enforcement. Exactly, George said. You did everyone a favor by being stubborn. I prefer persistent, I joked. Call it whatever you want. The result is what matters. As fall approached again and the storage season loomed, I found myself grateful for how things had turned out. My heated garage was warmer, more legal and more profitable than ever. My business was thriving. My neighborhood was peaceful. And Patricia Hammond was someone else's problem now, if she'd learned her lesson at all. The cycle began again in October. 9 vehicles rolled into my garage over the course of 2 weeks, their owners trusting me to keep their prized possessions safe through another Colorado winter. The space was full but organized, each vehicle positioned carefully to maximize room while maintaining access. I sealed the garage doors, fired up the heating system to its steady 65 degrees, and got back to work on the Challenger. Outside, the first hints of winter were appearing in the air, that crisp cold edge that promised snow before long. Inside my heated garage, surrounded by vintage vehicles and restoration projects, I was exactly where I wanted to be. Patricia had tried to take this away from me, and instead, she'd inadvertently helped me expand it. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just living well, doing your work, and letting the universe handle the balance sheet. Patricia had learned that lesson the hard way. I'd learned it too, but my lesson came with a much happier ending. The heated garage hummed quietly, maintaining perfect temperature while snow began to fall outside. 9 vehicles sat protected from the elements, their owners paying for the privilege. My business thrived. The HOA functioned fairly. And justice, delayed but not denied, had found its way home. That's the thing about fighting for what's right. Sometimes it costs you time, money, and stress. Sometimes it feels like you're fighting an unwinnable battle against people with more power and resources. But if you stay consistent, document everything, and refuse to back down in the face of bullying and unreasonable enforcement, eventually the truth comes out. And when it does, the satisfaction is worth every difficult moment along the way. My heated garage stood as proof of that. Warm and legal and profitable, everything Patricia had tried to prevent. She'd banned it, and I'd stopped storing summer vehicles free, and that simple action had set in motion a chain of events that transformed an entire neighborhood's governance. Not bad for a guy who just wanted to restore classic cars in a comfortable workspace. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance create the biggest changes. My heated garage proved that, one stored vehicle at a time,